Welcome, James.
Thank you. It's great to see both of you.
Yeah, again. That's the second time for you to be on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me back.
Yeah. And what did you feel about the first time being on a podcast?
Well, I was thankful to both of you for keeping me on track. I had 9 pages of notes on virtue ethics that I had compiled.
Yeah.
And thankfully, we only got through a half a page.
So now today is the other 8.5 pages then.
I was prepared in that sense for that podcast. This one is completely extemporaneous. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Those are the best type. The extemporaneous ones are the best type, really.
Yeah, oftentimes. Sure.
So, James, what we have done is we want to make use of the fact that you are a university professor, and we want to pick your academic brains. And the subject of today's discussion is if Angelina Jordan were taught as a university course. And I think this is a very rich subject. And let's start by saying, how is the syllabus of a university course, how is that decided? Is that decided by head office at a university? What is the process of how a syllabus comes to be?
Yeah, so if I wanted to put together a course on Angelina Jordan, I would probably first formulate the purpose of the course for students. So I want to get an idea. I want to be able to convey to the administration. This is not a typical course. So I want to convey to the administration the value to students of the course. And so I want to fill in the details of the course in my presentation to them so that they understand why this is a course that's worth teaching and is worth offering to students. A course like that would be very interdisciplinary. I'm in philosophy, but it would certainly include aspects of sociology and political science and, English and literature, business perhaps, music obviously. And so the course itself, if you could put it together in such a way that it was taught by faculty from different disciplines, that would probably be the best way to go. So with the syllabus, that's a document that you prepare for the students, basically. It has all the information about the course in the document, and it's going to give you a short description of the content of the course and the focus, and talk about the types of materials that we'll use in the course, and then have a weekly schedule of topics in the course as well. So that's the purpose of a syllabus.
So do you think that's doable then? Is that something that you could actually do? And what type of value would that bring?
It's not doable by me.
Okay.
If I were teaching the course just myself, I could certainly work on bringing in some aspects of sociology and political science and literature and cultural importance and things like that. But I'm not as well equipped, obviously, as faculty in other areas to do that. So I would be most comfortable designing the course as an interdisciplinary course co-taught by a number of faculty. I actually was looking on the internet at courses about singers and musicians that are taught in colleges, and I've got a short list here. So Bob Dylan, we mentioned that, and the Bob Dylan course, obviously one of the focuses of the Bob Dylan course is just as literature. Right. Yeah. Obviously, his lyrics are incredibly rich, and you could teach an entire course on the lyrics of Bob Dylan songs as a literature course, and it would fit in seamlessly with a course in poetry and such. Yeah. There's a course on Lana Del Rey. There's a Taylor Swift course. There's a course called Politicizing Beyonce. And so there you see, obviously, in the title of the course, they're alluding to the direction of the discussion and the emphasis on studying Beyonce. Sociology of hip hop, Jay-Z. Mm-hmm. So that's another course. There's a course on the sociology of Miley Cyrus.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
Bruce Springsteen's theology.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that course is focused on secular issues. So the short description I saw was the focus on Springsteen's lyrics and how they convey the possibility of redemption by earthly means.
Wow.
I think that there's one on Lady Gaga on the sociology of fame. And I think Angelina's, there's so much material there, obviously. She's only 17, but we have at least 10 years of material to work with. And you could fit it into a number of these categories and have a very rich course taught on that.
Yeah. What would your take on it be? What kind of headline would you put on it if you had the chance?
You know, I'd have to think about that. You want the title of a course to be catchy, you know, like Bruce Springsteen's Theology, you
Yeah.
know, where it piques your interest and you go, oh, well, it sounds interesting. I wonder what that's about. I'd have to think about that a little bit.
If you talk about Lady Gaga and fame, that's obvious, and maybe there's not that much more to talk about with Lady Gaga. But with Angelina Jordan, there are like 8 or 12 different major tributaries where we could go off
And come up with a title.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what this podcast is about. This podcast is about all the different aspects which would be covered in the course. And that's why this may be a very long podcast, because I think we can start by talking about the different levels of the way a fan will appreciate a musician. And in this way, I think Angelina Jordan really almost provides a breakthrough, because she gives us insight into an extreme result in terms of the fans' reaction. You know, some fans are moved so profoundly, and I don't just mean to the music as it's happening, but I mean the after effects. You know, Pontus is always talking about how once Angelina Jordan becomes famous, the effect of her will permeate. And this is something which really could and should be discussed in a course. The impact that a musician has.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, you could take different angles on that, certainly from a sociological point of view, but also just thinking about, as you mentioned, the impact of the artist. One of the aspects that I thought of was inspiration. So, you know, there's the admiration, there's the being moved by it, there's the healing aspect. These are things that Alan had mentioned in his note to me. And then for me, for example, inspiration, just in a sort of daily way almost, right? Because here's a figure where you listen to her music and it touches you in such a way that it kind of enhances your day moment by moment almost, right? I mean, I kind of carry that with me throughout the day. And, you know, when I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is I go to YouTube and I see what new reactions there are. You know, there's a sociological phenomenon right there. How many people are doing that and how many reactors are out there? And that's part of the inspiration, right? I mean, that's affecting my daily life to where I think that's the first thing I want to do when I get up in the morning, you know. So that's part of the effect she's had on me.
I don't know if there's any other artists you can say the same thing about. I mean, how many wake up each morning and go to YouTube and see a reaction video of Bruce Springsteen, for instance, and have that sort of affect their daily life? I'm not sure, but I think this is kind of a unique situation, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Bruce Springsteen. So Bruce Springsteen is someone that I know a little bit about. I actually think, for me at least, he's the one artist that I would compare to Angelina, just in terms of the influence on me. Not quite the same sort of permanent influence over time. But when I was younger, I went to a Springsteen concert for the first time, and I was way in the back of the stadium and way up you know, in the rafters. And I remember just looking down at everybody near the stage and thinking, wow, they're having so much fun down there. I wish I could be part of it. And then when they had a reunion tour about 10 years after that, I actually went to 10 different shows on that reunion tour. I went to shows in Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Anaheim, and then I flew to New York City. And I went to the last 3 shows at Madison Square Garden. And the reason it's worth mentioning Springsteen is because Bruce Springsteen does have a following that's, I think, similar in certain respects to Angelina, because it's about much more than the popularity of the music, so to speak, right? So if you go to a Bruce Springsteen concert, it's kind of like a secular revival. It's kind of like a religious experience. And everybody is there to experience that together. There is a great feeling of community and togetherness. And that's something that I think Angelina brings as well. You know, the way that people talk about her on YouTube or on the internet, and they talk about going to the concert, and they talk about meeting with other people at the concert and talking to them and all of this. It's a community, you know, and so I think in that respect it is similar, but there aren't many other artists that have the kind of robust impact on a community, so to speak, and put together a community, that have a community following them like Angelina. And I think as she becomes more and more popular, that's going to grow. And so the number of people worldwide that we see as part of this community, it's almost like an extended family, right? That's the feeling that you get being a part of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's special with an artist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the other aspect, which I think is very important, which I think also could and should be taught at university level, is how the personality of an artist affects and contributes to their art. Because it's one thing for Angelina to say that she wouldn't be the artist who she is without Billie Holiday, but it's the fans who know her well also know that because of who she is, that is why she can create the art that she does. And I think that is something which really, really could and should be studied very deeply at university, because if you have an artist who has no feeling as a human being, that must compromise his art.
Yeah.
You're smiling, James.
Yeah, and I think that affects the kind of people that are attracted to the artist and the experience of going to see them. That's a very different experience when the artists themselves, you know, when we're talking about the kind of person that they are, for example. And that's also why the Bruce Springsteen analogy came to mind, because the people that are there to watch those Bruce Springsteen shows, they're there in large part because of the kind of person that he is and the kind of relationship that he has with his audience. And again, I think that's something that's just essential to the Angelina experience, that the people who follow her and who are willing to travel halfway across the world to see her in a concert are there not just because she's a fantastic singer, but because of who she is as a person and how they can relate to that and how that makes them feel in the experience.
Yeah. So, Alan, maybe we should invite Bob. I'm not sure I remember his last name, but he flew in from the States to see the concert at Kongsberg, and then he flew back to the States, and then he flew back to Norway again for the July 10th concert. And I think that's really, that shows dedication.
What else do people do when they retire? They just follow their passion.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also amazing because she's just getting started, right? The concerts we were attending, they had, what, a couple of thousand people at most? And I mean, like, think of the concerts 5 years from now, how large they will be. It's going to be like Bruce Springsteen arena type of situations.
Well, if it's any consolation to you, Pontus, you and I will be recognized in the audience.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe introduced. I'm sure Angelina might stop and introduce you.
But with the university course, they may be able to tie what type of artist with what type of personality is the best combination, because I don't think Angelina could produce what she does if she were emotionally troubled, for example. You know, she has a certain type of purity of heart which is communicated with her singing. And those two arts, they're a unit. You cannot separate one from the other. And that is something which is not something which is part of the common vocabulary. That is something I think which could and should be explored more, especially in a university course.
Yeah, and I was thinking also that's the kind of course where you would have guest speakers come in, for example. So they could be, someone representing the music industry, could be someone from Republic Records, for example, could be a fan. You mentioned Bob, who traveled twice, halfway across the world to see her. You could have him come in and just talk about that experience and, why he would want to go halfway across the world, et cetera, right? That's really appealing to students because it gets them out of the usual kind of lecture style of a class or something like that. So they really love it when they have a guest speaker and can get into a discussion with them that's a little different than the usual.
One of the areas where I think is the most interesting is the effect that an artist can have on society at large. And I think Angelina's vision here comes to play, where she won't go onto a stage wearing shoes until all the children in the world have shoes. And that kind of message is thought out and so simple, really, but can have such a great impact on people's, on society, really.
Yeah, it's powerful. The simplicity is part of the power of it because everyone can easily relate to that, so to speak. That's a symbolic as well, right? Sometimes Angelina's story reminds me of a mythology, where it's got these heroic elements and these mythological elements to the story. And you could put together a creative story about a mythological figure, and you could fill in the details with Angelina's life story. And that could be your figure, and you could pull it off. It could be like, here's this mythological character that had this great influence and came from these beginnings and did these various things and influenced people and had this following after a while and became this world phenomenon or whatever. You could fit in the elements to Angelina's own story. So that's part of it, the symbolic nature and the simple nature of that gesture from her, for example, with not wearing shoes and the story behind it.
For her, charity begins in the heart. And I think the opposite of charity is a marketing ploy. And all of her fans know that everything and anything she does is not a marketing ploy. She's like the opposite of marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good point because me personally, I'm always on the lookout for the marketing ploy. Just to take a simple example, if I look at a reaction video and I see the thumbnail picture and it's what they call clickbait,
Yeah.
right? So it's got this picture of the reactor on there and they've got this look on their face like they've just seen a ghost, Yeah, exactly. And I go, I'm already feeling manipulated.
Yeah.
And that's a different feeling than a feeling of, hey, I'm inviting you to my reaction. Here's my genuine reaction. Here's my sincere reaction. And that's a different experience. And so I think you're absolutely right, Alan, that you get that from Angelina. For example, the amount of time that she and her family waited just to sign a recording contract. They could have done that, obviously, at a much younger age for Angelina. And no doubt they would have made a lot of money doing that. But that wasn't their focus. And that's important to me as a fan and to me as a person who is influenced by her art. That's important to me. That matters because I see her as having integrity and being genuine. And when she comes on stage and she talks to the audience, and she says, I love you guys.
I love you guys so, so much. There aren't words to describe it.
I know she means it.
Yeah.
It's not just a politician telling me something, and that's an essential part of her, what's attractive about her as an artist.
Something else which I think should be mentioned in the university course is what type of people will use Angelina Jordan as a role model. I think one possible answer is potentially everyone.
I hope so.
I can't think of any category that would be excluded.
Yeah. think about the marketing strategy, I'm obviously not privy to that with Republic Records or anything. And she's 17, right? So she's a teenager. And typically, at least, if you have a teenager that you're trying to market and get as much mass appeal as possible, that's going to be a very different marketing campaign than, others might be. I don't know. I guess I won't compare her to any particular other musicians or singers, but you can think of those that were marketed at a very young age as teenagers, and the marketing was geared toward mass appeal. And so it was obviously geared as well toward teenagers for the most part. That's a very different approach to marketing and to the career of the artist and the way that the artist is presenting themselves to the public and to the audience than I think of, for example, with Angelina, right? It's very clear that's not what's going on with her. They're not just using her to try and get as many teenagers, for example, to buy her music as possible. Yeah. And that also speaks to the integrity that we talked about. And I hope that she has mass appeal. The more people in the world that become aware of her and that can be affected by her art, by the kind of person that she is, the better.
I know one category that Angelina Jordan is probably ahead of everyone else in the world, and that is grandparents introducing music to their grandchildren. In that respect, she's probably the world number one.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Alan, you mentioned the Billie Holiday quote and the influence that Billie Holiday had on Angelina. But Alan mentioned the influence that her grandmother, Mary, has had on her. And that's really where you might say, without her, and obviously she's in her videos. We've seen her in a number of her videos and such. And that's part of her story. Part of her story is she's got this family that, I wish I had a family like that. And that's actually, just for me personally, that's part of the appeal. There's lots of different aspects to the appeal, but that's actually part of it. I didn't have a family like that. And I look at that and I almost vicariously, I can experience at least something like that because of the connection that Angelina has to her audience. I actually feel, I'm obviously not a part of her family, but I feel a little bit like I am part of her family in that sense, and that's of value to me.
James, do you know, sometimes when I watch Angelina Jordan performing, especially if I think her grandmother is holding the camera, sometimes I get the feeling when Angelina Jordan does a wonderful, stellar performance, I get the feeling, Granny, this is how much I love you. With what I put into this song. It's almost like she's singing directly to her and for her, and she said, I want to be an artist just like you, Granny, because this is how much I love you. This is the feeling I get from her.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we know that a lot of those videos, her grandmother was behind the camera, and sometimes we see her. Yeah. We see her at the end of I'm a Fool to Want You, when she's with the microphone, and then at the very end we see her grandmother. I think her grandmother may have been the one with the camera in the very early recordings that she did in her high school in the studio and such. And I think you're absolutely right. Part of what's going on in those performances is her expression of her love for her grandmother and the importance that her grandmother has had on her as an artist.
Yeah, in that particular piece you mentioned, I'm a Fool to Want You. There's so much going on with trading looks. Almost after each phrase she sings, she looks at her grandmother and they communicate silently. This was great, or okay. And that's a great insight into the process that they have.
Yeah, and the thumbs up when she's 6 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when Angelina Jordan sings Bohemian Rhapsody in the garage with her grandmother next to her grandmother is looking up to her, totally incredulous Like, I cannot believe that
Yes.
this is my granddaughter who can do this.
Yeah.
I am blessed.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Mama, I don't wanna die. I sometimes wish I'd never been born at all. Well, baby, can't do this to me, baby. Just got it out, just got it out of me. Yeah. Nothing really matters. Anyone can say nothing really.
This is really where we have hit the dilemma of what the university course cannot teach. It cannot teach that type of love that you get from the family. You can only talk about it, but it's totally pure conjecture and it's theoretical. That's really where the academic course reaches its limit.
Sure. Yeah. There's a couple of things I wanted to mention. So that point that you just made also reminded me of something that Pontus had said in our first podcast. He said, I don't know her. I have these ideas about her and I understand the way that she influences me, but I don't know her personally. And I think we should keep that in mind. We don't know her personally. We're not actually a part of her family. There is a line that separates people who do know her personally and fans. And I think it's important to maintain the right boundary there and the right amount of respect for her as an individual person and for her family, and to sort of not cross over that boundary. So that's one thing. Well, the other thing I was going to mention is we were talking about her grandmother and her family. The TikTok video that she put out about Love Don't Let Me Go, where Juliet appears, I was floored by the maturity and the sincerity when Juliet appeared in that video and she talked to Angelina and they had this interaction. And Juliet said something like, I'm so proud to be your sister and to see you grow.
It's such an honor to be your sister and watching you grow up as like a singer.
And I thought, oh my gosh, that is so impressive to me. And just once again, I think reflects what kind of family they have, what kind of upbringing Juliet and Angelina have had. And I was just really impressed by Juliet as well there.
Instead of the course being Angelina Jordan 101, it's How a Family Should Be 101.
Yeah. Somehow we need to work into that. It's hard to do because the title shouldn't be too long. It's hard to work everything into the title that we think is essential to the Angelina course. But yeah, something in there that would convey the idea that this is not just about a popular figure. It's not just about a celebrity. It's more than that. So
maybe there is a lesson to be learned here in regards to family and how we should all treat each other within a family, because most of the dark side of humanity is contained somewhere in the family. The whole abuse situation, and it doesn't have to be as bad as abuse. It can be like psychological battles between parents and even between a parent and a child. There are things there that needs to be addressed, I think, because if we have a family unit that is working, then the persons that are coming out of that situation is so much more ready to bring something into the world from the positive side.
Yeah. So that reminds me of Angelina's appearance on The View. And she was 8 years old, and it was after, of course, she'd won Norway's Got Talent. And there's the interview before her performance of Fly Me to the Moon with Rosie O'Donnell. And Rosie asks her, "So, what's this show called that you realized you could go sing on?" And Angelina says, "The View." And, everyone kind of laughs a little bit. And of course, Rosie is talking about Norway's Got Talent. What struck me about that interaction was Angelina's response when she realized that she wasn't talking about The View, she was talking about Norway's Got Talent. And everyone kind of laughed. And Angelina's response was to laugh right along with them.
There's a show on TV where you can go and sing, right? What's it called?
The View.
Oh, yes, that's this one. Yes, you can sing on this one, you're right.
And I was thinking, wow, if that were me and I was 8 years old, I would want to run away.
Yeah.
When I made that mistake and I knew that there was an audience and there were millions of people perhaps watching me and I just messed up, I would just feel like it was a disaster. And I was so heartened by the fact that for her, it was nothing. It was something to laugh about. And to me, that moment reflects the fact that she has been brought up a certain way and that she feels loved and that she feels secure and she doesn't have to worry about making a mistake like that. It wasn't really a mistake, of course, but she doesn't have to worry about saying something that people laugh at, right? Because she has that inner security and that feeling. And to me, that's what really struck me about that short interview that she had before her performance on that show, because it reflected the fact that she is perfectly comfortable with herself and with putting herself out there, even at that age, and having something happen where people laugh and laughing right along with them. I really appreciate the fact that she comes from that place where she feels that secure and she feels that loved, and she knows if people are laughing, they're not laughing at her, and she doesn't have to worry about that.
Yeah, once again, it's like a role model for us insecure people
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
are afraid to stand in front of a crowd and speak, for instance. That's one of the most common fears we have as humans, really. And then we have this terrific role model to look up to. Here's this 8-year-old kid that's not afraid of anything, really.
Yeah.
If I ever went on TV, I would say, yes, I'm happy to go on TV, but I would like to be able to edit the clip afterwards.
Yes, like I've told you about our recordings. Please make sure you edit out all the stuff that I, And you mentioned Pontus, her as a role model and learning, how to interact and all of that. As a teacher, it took me, and I'm still learning, by the way, but it took me a long time to learn how to interact in certain ways with students in the classroom, for example. So one of the things that you have to make sure you do is you don't bring your personal life to the classroom. So you had a bad morning and somebody flipped you off in traffic and you were pissed off, and you don't bring that into the classroom, right? And you can see the interactions that Angelina, again, even at that very early age, has had with people, and you can learn from that. And so if a student says something in the classroom that sounds at first like it's a little bit offensive or sounds like it's dismissive or anything like that, I have learned, and it took me a while to learn this, but I have learned that you don't react to that as if you were sitting down with someone in a one-to-one conversation and that's all there was to it. It's a different setting, and there's a certain way of conveying yourself that's appropriate to that setting. And just learning to interact with people in a way that is not so judgmental as well, by the way. I think that is something that I've learned a lot from Angelina. I remember when Howie Mandel said to Angelina, "Great performance, wonderful. I think you're deserving of winning, but," and then he said, "there are super fans and it's up to them."
This is so amazing. And one word comes to mind when I listen to you, and that's hypnotic. You know, I just get drawn into your sound and your performance, and nothing else that's going on around me even matters. It's just all about you. You truly are a champion. But there are super fans representing all 50 states who only have to choose one, and that's tough. And you are worthy of being that one.
If it were me, I might have thought, well, hey, wait a minute, you were just praising me, and now all of a sudden you're telling me I'm not necessarily going to win, and blah, blah, blah. And her reaction was just, of course, thank you, I appreciate that, and et cetera, you know. And it's just another example where I think you can look at the way she conveys herself and the way she interacts with people, and she's a role model in that way. Yeah.
James, you touch on something which hasn't been mentioned very much, and that is Angelina Jordan just shows enough of her private life just to make it appropriate without too much. So we know a little bit about her family, but for example, I've never heard the voice of her grandmother, and her mother mostly stays in the background. And so we know a very little bit, and she and her team very much control how much privacy they are exposing to their private life. And I think they've just got that right. Just enough for us to feel part of the family without it being too invasive for them.
Yeah, everyone seems to be very adept at that talent in the family. I remember an interview with her mother, and the interviewer, this was when Angelina was younger. She was, maybe 8 years old or something. The interviewer asked something that sort of crossed the line on that privacy boundary.
Was it about kissing Santa Claus?
It may have been. I don't remember exactly. But her mother's response was this perfect way of not offending the interviewer, but gently letting the interviewer know that's not a question that I'm really going to answer.
I saw Mama kissing Santa Claus. Er det en sann historie, eller, Sara?
Nei, det håper jeg ikke.
And there's an art to that. And you see that in Angelina as well. There is an art to being able to walk that fine line between being available, being a public figure, having an audience, and maintaining your privacy as well. And it's remarkable from such a young age that she's been able to do that.
I think that there's something else which could and should be taught on the Angelina Jordan course, and that is how many different genres she covers and which other artists even begin to cover half as many genres as she does.
Yeah. So I did a slight bit of research about this, and there were some names that popped up. And I said, who are some versatile singers, and part of what strikes me about the uniqueness of Angelina's versatility, it's not just that she can sing songs in different genres. It's the way that she's able to sing songs in different genres. And it's the voice that we hear in different genres. So I was thinking, here's 3 songs. Lovin' You, her live performance of Lovin' You when she was 11. Her recording of Song for A, which is a classical song. And then Nothing Breaks Like a Heart. If you think about those 3 songs and how different they are, and not just how different the songs are, but how different she sounds singing those songs. It's astounding. I can't think of another artist. There are certainly other artists who can cross, different genres and sound great, but they sound like the same artist. It sounds like that artist singing a different kind of song. And with Angelina, it's like she sounds like a different singer.
It was upon a lamest night when courageous are lovely. Beneath the moon's unclouded light, I held away to Arnie. I heard you on the phone last night and live and die by pretty lies. You know it, we both know it. There's several bullets, cigarettes, there's burned a house, there's nothing left, it's smoking, it's smoking. We got a night to fall in love, but just like that we fall apart, we broken. Well, nothing gonna save us now.
If I were a student and you were the professor and you were explaining that, I would raise my hand and say, Mr. Winter, why can she do this and no other singer do this?
And I would say, I don't know. One of the things that I learned in the classroom is if you're asked a question that you don't know the answer to, that's what you say.
Good answer.
But that's a really interesting question. I actually had a job interview, actually for the job that I have right now. In my job interview, I was asked a question. Does Kant think that there are any other categorical imperatives besides those having to do with morality? So you don't have to worry about what that means. But I was asked that question, right? I didn't know the answer. And I said, wow, that is a really interesting question, and I don't know the answer. And sometimes that's the right answer. And I think there are a lot of questions that I could be asked if I were teaching a course about Angelina that students might ask about her. And I'm not going to be able to give an answer. We can talk about it and maybe we can speculate together. And that's got a value to it. There's a value to being able to think about that and think about what the answer might be. But, you know, it's kind of like saying, why was she born with this talent? I don't know. Not everyone's born with that talent, are they?
Analysis is good up to a point, but then you reach a gap where analysis no longer can help you anymore, and you have to take the leap, the non-analytical leap.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to describe the effect of her music in a YouTube comment.
Exactly.
You can't do it. And when I first started leaving comments on her performances and on reactions to her performances on YouTube, sometimes I would craft these kind of lengthy paragraph long, and I would try and put everything in there that I thought about her performance and how it affected me and all of these things. And after a while, I just realized, I just need to say I was moved. I was moved to tears. And I don't know what else to say beyond that. And so sometimes you can't put into words the effect that she has.
I believe that this podcast will be the first thing that they show when they teach an Angelina Jordan course. And they will use this podcast as the introduction to the whole course.
Yeah, and that's fine with me because I get out of a day of teaching that way.
Okay.
When I get to show a video, I get to sit back and just watch the video. I don't have to worry too much about putting on a performance for the students. So I'm all for that.
James, I'm sure the head of your university will get in touch with you to teach the Angelina Jordan course as a result of this interview.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
If that happens, I will definitely let you know.
What song do you want us to play here at the end?
Oh, gosh. I hadn't thought about that. Is there a song that comes to mind that fits the topic of our discussion?
Yes.
What do you think?
Back to School.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Sure.
That is a nice one. I think the lyrics there is overlooked because they're really spot on. She sort of questions the whole idea of going to school because I can learn everything and more traveling the world, really.
Yeah, that's what she said in her interview, and I remember that. I used to joke about that in my comments when there were reactions to the song, and she said, "I'm not going back to school," or and I said, "Well, she doesn't have to because she's learning more traveling around than she would in school, so that's not a problem."
James, you've been great. This is a great interview, and considering how spontaneous it was, it's worked really well. Really well.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thanks so much, James.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Make me go